I have held the hands of the dying for 63 years. I have sat beside beds where breath slowed to nothing, where the chest stopped its faithful rising, where the eyes fixed on something I could not see from where I stood. I have signed more death certificates than I can count. I have spoken to widows and widowers and children who had just become orphans, and I have used careful, measured words, the words of science, the words of medicine, the words of a woman who believed above all things in what could be proven and recorded and repeated in a controlled environment. My name is Valdra Eschlin. I am 95 years old. I was born in a small Swiss village where the church bell rang every morning at 6, and the mountains watched everything with perfect indifference. I studied medicine at a time when women in medicine were tolerated rather than welcomed. I built a career over decades: cardiology, internal medicine, eventually a long focus on palliative care, on the science of dying itself. I authored papers, I attended conferences, I trained young doctors who went on to train other young doctors. And somewhere in all of that, I became a person who was absolutely certain about what death was. Death, I believed, was the cessation of biological function. It was the end of electrical activity in the brain, the stilling of the heart, the slow chemical breakdown of everything that had once been a thinking, feeling person. There was nothing afterward. Not darkness, not peace, not reunion, just nothing, the way there is nothing before you are born. I found this thought neither frightening nor comforting. I found it simply accurate. I held this belief with the same confidence I held my stethoscope. And then, on a Thursday morning in February, my heart stopped for 4 minutes and 22 seconds, and everything I had spent a lifetime being certain about dissolved like salt in warm water. Let me tell you what happened, exactly as I remember it, with no softening and no dramatization. I had been experiencing fatigue for several weeks. I attributed it to age. At 94, fatigue is not a mystery. It is simply the ambient condition of existence. My colleague and former student, Dr. Parveen Hasmukh, had been gently insisting I come in for monitoring, and I had been gently deflecting, the way doctors do when they believe the rules of medicine apply to everyone except themselves. Finally, on a Tuesday, I agreed. On Thursday, I was in the cardiology unit of the hospital where I had worked for 40 years. Now on the other side of the bed, wearing the thin cotton gown that I had always thought was an indignity, and now understood was an indignity, when my heart went into ventricular fibrillation. I know what ventricular fibrillation is. I have treated it hundreds of times. I know exactly what happens to the brain when the heart stops pumping oxygenated blood. the neurons begin to fail within seconds. Consciousness fragments, and within 4 to 6 minutes, without intervention, the damage becomes irreversible. I know all of this. I knew it while it was happening to me. And yet, the last thing I remember from the physical world is a sound, a long, flat tone from the monitor beside my bed, and Parveen's face turning sharply toward it, her expression shifting from concerned colleague to emergency physician in the span of half a second. I remember thinking with what felt like complete calm, so this is how it happens. And then I was somewhere else entirely. I want to be precise here, because precision is the only tool I have left. I did not drift. I did not fade. There was no tunnel, which I had read about extensively in the near-death literature I had always privately dismissed. There was no darkness followed by light. One moment I was in a hospital bed watching Parveen reach for the crash cart, and the next moment I was standing with a body that felt more real than any body I had ever inhabited, in a place I cannot adequately describe using the vocabulary available to me in any of the 4 languages I speak. I will try anyway. Imagine a landscape that is not made of matter. Imagine space that has depth and dimension, but does not follow the rules of geometry you learned in school. The closest I can come is this. It was as if someone had taken the feeling of a perfect autumn afternoon, the particular quality of light, the temperature, the sense of expansiveness, and made it into a place. Not a place that contained those qualities, a place that was those qualities, built into architecture. The light did not come from above. It did not come from any direction. It was simply present, the way air is present, permeating everything. And it had a warmth to it that I can only describe as intentional. Not the warmth of a sun burning hydrogen 93 million miles away. The warmth of something that was paying attention. I stood there. Stood is perhaps the wrong word, but I was upright. I was present. I had a vantage point, and I understood immediately that I was not dreaming. I have had 95 years of dreams. I know what dreams feel like. Dreams have a softness at the edges, a susceptibility to logic's collapse. This had no soft edges. This was harder and more real than anything I had experienced while living. If anything, the world I had left behind suddenly seemed like the dream, the thin, flickering, provisional dream, and this was the substrate beneath it. Then I became aware that I was not alone. I do not know how to tell this part without sounding like exactly the kind of person I would have privately pitied during my years of practice. I am aware of how it sounds. I am choosing to tell it anyway because I spent my career telling other people that the truth was more important than comfort, and I do not get to abandon that principle simply because the truth is inconvenient to my previous understanding of the universe. There was a presence with me. It did not have a form, or if it did, the form was too large and too multidimensional for me to perceive as a shape. What I perceived was, I keep returning to this word, attention. I was being known, completely and without remainder, the way I have never been known by any person in 95 years of human relationships. Every human relationship involves a partial knowing, an edited version of the self that is offered to another person. Even those who love us most know only the parts of us we have shown them, and we know this, and we carry the unshown parts alone. Here there was no alone. Everything I had ever done, thought, felt, hidden, regretted, celebrated, was known. Every calculation I had made, every patient I had helped, and every patient I had failed. Every morning I had woken early to study. Every night I had stayed late when I would rather have gone home. Every cruelty I had spoken without meaning to. Every small act of kindness I had performed when no one was watching. The person I had been to my husband Irvin in the good years and in the years when things were harder. The doctor, the colleague, the woman who had loved mountains and black coffee, and the particular silence of a library. All of it known. And here is what I expected, judgment. This is what the church had taught me in childhood, the accounting, the weighing of souls, the verdict. What I received instead was nothing remotely like that. What I received was love. Not the word love, not the concept, not a feeling one describes as love in the way we say, I love this piece of music, or even, I love this person. Something for which the word love is a pale, two-dimensional silhouette. Something so disproportionate to anything I had earned or deserved, that the only rational response was to stop trying to rationalize it entirely. I was loved, not despite being fully known. I was loved because I was fully known. The knowing and the loving were not separate events. They were the same event. There was no version of being seen that was not also being embraced. I wept. I do not weep easily. I have not wept easily in 70 years. I wept. Then something happened that I struggle to describe in sequence, because sequence implies time, and I do not believe time existed there in the way it exists here. I understood things, not in the way you understand a lecture or an argument or an explanation. The understanding arrived the way you understand that you are cold when you step outside. Immediate, total, requiring no intermediate steps. things I had wondered about for decades, questions I had turned over in my mind during night calls and long train journeys and the quiet years after Irvin died, was simply answered. Not answered in the sense that someone provided the answers, answered in the sense that the questions dissolved, because I could see from a vantage point where the questions and their answers were visible at the same time. The way you can see both ends of a river if you are high enough above it. I will not pretend I can bring those understandings back intact. I cannot. Returning to this body and this brain is like trying to carry water in your hands. You make it back, but you lose most of it in transit. What I can tell you is the shape of what I understood, even if the content is largely gone. I understood that consciousness is not produced by the brain. This is the one I want to be most careful and most precise about, because it is the most significant and the most contrary to everything I believed professionally. I spent decades operating on the assumption, the foundational, unexamined assumption of my field, that consciousness is a product of neural activity, that the self is something the brain generates, the way a fire generates heat, that when the fire goes out, the heat is gone. What I understood in that place is that this is backwards. Consciousness is not the product of the brain. The brain is a device that consciousness uses to interact with physical reality. The relationship is closer to that of a radio and the signal it receives. Destroy the radio, and the signal does not cease to exist. It simply is no longer being received in that location. I understood that what we call death is a change in location, not an ending. I understood that the question of whether there is an afterlife is, from where I stood, genuinely funny. The way a child's question about whether there is a world beyond their bedroom is funny to an adult who has seen the world. Not unkindly funny, gently funny. The way a true thing is sometimes funny when you see it from the right angle. I understood that everything I had ever done in the direction of love, every moment of genuine care for a patient, every hour of honest attention given to another human being, every small insistence on telling the truth when lying would have been easier, all of it had mattered in ways I had no instruments to measure from inside a human life. The instruments were too small, but it had mattered. I understood that the things the Church had told me about the afterlife were not wrong in intention, but they were, I will use the word I kept arriving at, provincial, small, built to the scale of human power structures rather than to the actual scale of what exists. The judgment, the punishment, the narrow gates, these were not lies exactly, but they were the afterlife described by people who had not been there. described from the outside with human tools. Being there is different. Being there, the overwhelming experience is not awe before power, but recognition before love. The word I kept finding was home. Not home like a house, home like the state of being completely, unreservedly, finally in the right place. I do not know how long I was there. As I said, I do not believe time was operating the same way. At some point, and again, the sequence is inexact, I became aware that I was being returned. I did not choose this. It was not put to me as a choice, the way the near-death literature sometimes describes the door and the decision. There was simply a shift, a movement, a passage, and then the particular brutal reality of a hospital bed in fluorescent light, and Parveen's voice saying my name, and an oxygen mask on my face. The pain was extraordinary, not because I was injured, but because returning to a body after not having one is a shock that I am not sure language was built to describe. Every nerve ending reported itself simultaneously. I was suddenly small, suddenly bounded, suddenly unable to perceive more than a narrow slice of reality. It was like being stuffed back into a coat several sizes too small. I cried, I am told, for 11 minutes. Parveen thought it was the pain. It was grief. It was grief at returning, the specific grief of having been somewhere so completely right, and then being back somewhere that is only provisionally, approximately, partially right. I have never felt that grief leave me in the months since it happened. I have learned to carry it with some degree of grace, but it does not go away. People ask me what I believe now. This is a complicated question to answer at 95, when you have spent a career being careful about the difference between what you know and what you believe. Let me try to be as precise as I have always tried to be. I believe, with the same quality of conviction I once reserved for well-replicated clinical trials, that death is not what I thought it was. I believe that consciousness persists. I believe that whatever is at the center of existence is something that operates primarily in the mode of love rather than judgment, and that this is not a comfortable human wish fulfillment, but an observable fact that I observed. I believe that the things we do in the direction of one another matter in ways we cannot fully see from inside our human lives. I do not believe this makes death easy. My patients are still losing things when they die. Their relationships, their bodies, their presence here. I do not minimize that. Loss is real. Grief is real. The people who remain are poorer for the absence of those who go. None of what I experienced negates that. but I no longer believe death is the end. I believe it is the end of a sentence, not the end of what the sentence was trying to say. I have revised the foundational assumption of my professional life. I do this not because I want to believe something comforting. Ask anyone who has known me. Comfort has never been a primary value of mine. I do this because honesty requires it. I saw what I saw. I understood what I understood. I came back changed in the way that things that have been through fire are changed. The same material, but reorganized at a level below the surface, and nothing since has been quite the same temperature as it was before. I am 95 years old. I have perhaps months, perhaps a year, perhaps slightly more. My heart is cooperative, but no longer ambitious. I face what is coming, not with the resigned acceptance I would have described to a patient some years ago, not with terror, not with the forced peace of someone reciting beliefs they have chosen to adopt for their own protection. I face it with something that took me 94 years and 4 minutes of clinical death to arrive at. I face it with recognition, with the knowledge of someone who has been to a place and knows they are going back. The mountains I grew up beneath were always there before I was born, and will be there after I am gone. They were not diminished by my absence before birth, and I will not be diminished by my absence from here. That is what the church did not tell me. That is what the flat line on the monitor did. I held the hands of the dying for 63 years. Now I know what I was holding them toward. It is not nothing. It is so far from nothing that nothing cannot even see it from where nothing stands. And for whatever time I have left in this thin, bright, provisional world, that knowledge is the only thing I carry that does not feel too heavy for the distance.